you heard the president touch on it early on about our bus operators, you know, being arrested. I'm not saying that Ken is special and he's just only paying attention to us, but he's hearing us. He's hearing us and he understands our concern like many other elected officials, right? And this is the reason why we put people in the office. We don't want to be special either, but we want people to do what's right. Yeah. And if you don't do what's right when you put you in office, the next election, we'll take a stand. Right? But I can proudly stand here and say this evening that these are our friends in here this evening.
I want to say thank you so much, Earl. I want to thank John Samuelson. I want to thank all of you brothers and sisters for allowing me to come by and just speak with you very briefly. I am truly honored to stand with TWU Local 100. And my brother is a transit worker. He's a track worker. He works on the tracks at night. And so I want to just speak with you because today we have I'm honored to be here, not just to say a couple of words, but I'm honored because I see Eric Gardner's family here. And I know I'm honored because I see the Honorable Hazel Dukes sitting here. And my brothers in the council, Robert Carnegie and Matthew Eugene. And so earlier at this event, I believe everyone, I'm sorry I got here after it started, but I believe you sang the Black National Anthem. Yes. And the words that say, facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on to victory is won. Those are words that were spoken by people who only wanted justice and fairness, who wanted to be treated with dignity and respect, and people who paved the way to allow someone like me to stand before you as the first Black Brooklyn District Attorney. And so I'm here. I want to talk with you just briefly about the enormous courage and enormous contributions of Black Americans and other people of African descent. People who gave their lives to make this country live up to its declaration that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You see, as Brooklyn DA, I am here to work with each and every one of you to make Brooklyn a fairer place for all. Now, our history, it's great that we're celebrating Black history, and I'm honored to be here. But let me tell you, you know, Black history didn't begin in slavery. It is important to say that over and over again. These beautiful children who came up here tonight, we have to continually tell them this. Because before the slave traders came to the shores of Africa, the people of West Africa had a great and rich history and culture. Before the slave traders came to Africa, there were the great kingdoms of Ghana, the great kingdoms of Mali, Timbuktu, and the pyramids. Before the Middle Passage, the folks, the Africans, were skilled in science, math, and medicine. We made great objects and items out of gold and out of ivory for trade. You see, somehow our great history is not taught in the schools today. And so our children grow up believing that they descended from slaves and only slaves. You see, slavery was a detour on our history. It wasn't the beginning of our history. And so we have an obligation to let our children know that they are descendants of kings and queens. That's important. Now, if we're going to talk about slavery, like we often do during Black History Month, we have to talk about the greatness of one of the most amazing, courageous Americans who ever lived, and that was Harriet Tubman. Now, Harriet Tubman, many of us know, was born around 1820 in Maryland. And what she did as a young woman, a slave owner threw a metal object and hit Harriet Tubman in her head. And she suffered from seizures the rest of her life. Was born into slavery and escaped and left her husband and family behind. But Harriet Tubman went back on 20 occasions for her people and helped free 300 slaves from the South when there was a bounty over her head for her life. Now, Harriet Tubman never lost a slave, so she led to freedom. And she carried a revolver, and she had a policy. Once you joined her, there was no turning back. And she was not afraid to use that revolver. But she had great intelligence as well. because in 1850 they passed what's called the Fugitive Slave Law, which meant that slaves caught in the North who ran away could be returned to the South. And so what she did is she redirected the Underground Railroad to Canada to free people. And so many people don't even know that in October of 1865, Harriet Tubman came right here to Brooklyn. Right here to Brooklyn, a few blocks away. She spoke at Bridge Street. And she talked about her experience leading 300 slaves to freedom. And her hand was bandaged, and she stood up because it was wound. She suffered a wound to her hand, and she stood up in front of that audience with bandages on her hand and talked about her life and about how God freed her and how she had an obligation to fight for her people. Now, we have more that we can point to besides Harriet Tubman. We have courage that was shown by Dred Scott, that was shown by Medgar Evers, and that was shown by so many others. When Dr. Martin Luther King in 1967 went to Riverside Church, he went to give a speech against the Vietnam War, and it was extremely unpopular. And what he did that night, he indicted the United States government. He said, we're taking thousands of black men and sending them 8,000 miles away. Black men who we've crippled as a society, sending them to Southeast Asia to fight for liberties and guarantees that they can't get in Southwest Georgia or East Harlem. And so Dr. King showed us courage. And we here in Brooklyn must do the same. Now, we have an issue here in Brooklyn, and it is the issue of wrongful convictions. Men have been put on trial right here in the great county of Kings and convicted for murders that they did not commit. Wrongful convictions destroy not only the lives of the men who are wrongfully convicted, but their families. And it destroys the integrity of our criminal justice system. And so we can no longer ignore these wrongful convictions. We have to admit, and as the Brooklyn DA, I'm here to admit that mistakes have been made in the criminal justice system. And that mistakes are made every day. And so what I've begun to do is to look at these cases, because as the DA, I believe I should lead the way. I must make sure that we prevent these wrongful convictions, because not only do innocent men go to prison, but the guilty remain among us to continue to commit crimes and terrorize our communities. And so, in a little over a year in office, I inherited 100 murder convictions that had to be reviewed. And in a little over a year, I've gone through about 32 cases. And I have concluded, based on the investigations we conducted, that 12 men were wrongfully convicted in Brooklyn. And so I've moved in the interest of justice to vacate their convictions. This is a chart of all the men so far that I've been able to vacate their convictions and free. Now, some of them I didn't get to in time because some of them died in prison. But I made a decision, even if they're no longer with us, they have an obligation to get their good name back. And so I have decided to vacate their convictions even if they're no longer with us. And I called their parents, their mothers, and asked them to come to court and stand in the shoes of where their son should have stood. And so if you think, oh, DA, those are folks who were convicted of murder, that doesn't apply to me. Well, I want to tell you about a young man named Michael Waite. Michael Waite is like many of us. Michael Waite came to this country from a beautiful place. He came here as an immigrant from Barbados as a young man. Got a job as a security guard right here in Brooklyn at an apartment building. And one night a woman accused him of stealing her car. When she was going to work, her car wasn't there. She said, "You stole my car." He said, "I didn't see your car." So his family said, "Michael, quit that job." This was a good family, a hard-working family, an honest family. So he quit and got another job. A couple of months later, that same woman accused him of burglarizing her apartment. Now, this man had never been arrested before in Barbados or in the United States. And he was in this country with a green card. He was in this country legally. And so they put that man on trial. And guess what he did? He testified in his own defense. So did his grandmother, so did his sister, saying he was home with them the night this burglary allegedly occurred. Well, guess what? Michael Waite was convicted at trial. And he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. Now, this was way back in 1987. And after he did his time, he got out and he resumed living a good life, a law-abiding life. And so Michael Waite was 23 when he went in. Now he's 54 years old. And so he has 4 daughters and a granddaughter. So he went back to Barbados for one of his daughter's weddings. And when he landed in Kennedy Airport, immigration was waiting. And they grabbed him. And since 2011, they've been trying to deport Michael Waite to Barbados based on his conviction that happened 30 years ago. Well, you know what he did? He wrote me a letter back in October. He said, D.A. Thompson, I need you to look at my case. I have been framed, and now I'm facing deportation. I'm facing the threat of being ripped apart from my family. And so I looked at the letter, and I brought him in, and we interviewed him. And we found this man to be credible. Now, the only evidence we had was the testimony of this eyewitness. The woman said she saw him carrying her TV in her living room. But she was no longer living in Brooklyn. She had moved down to a small town in Georgia. So guess what? My people flew down there to interview her. And we said, we need to talk to you about this trial. She said, what trial? The trial 30 years ago when this man was convicted for burglarizing your house. Make a long story short, she admitted that she had framed this man. That the burglary never happened 30 years ago. And so 2 weeks ago, I moved in the interest of justice to vacate Michael Waite's conviction. And what I'm going to do is stand with that brother. I'm going to stand with Michael Waite and help him fight the efforts to deport him. Yes. Because he deserves to stay in this country and stay with his family. I give you that example because anyone could have been Michael Waite. And so I'm no longer going to focus just on murder cases. I have an obligation to go beyond murder convictions. And so I stand before you truly honored that I can serve you as Brooklyn DA. You see, I started out in the projects of New York City, raised by a single mother. My mother became a cop in 1973 when there were no female police officers on the street, black or white. And she became one of the first to patrol the streets. And because she gave her life to give us a better life, my brother, you call him Will, we call him Dean, is a track worker at night. And now I'm Brooklyn DA. And so I want you to know that I am with this union. I am with you to the very end. Because I am TWU. I may be the DA, but I'm down with you. Okay? So I want to tell you that it's my honor to be here, and I want us to come together to show courage to correct miscarriages of justice. Right. I want us to show courage to unite, to fight against the gun violence that's literally killing our children right before our eyes. And I want us to fight, to show the courage to fight for a better criminal justice system that will be fair and dispense justice evenly regardless of race or how much money you have or where you come from or where you live. Together, if we do this, we can make Brooklyn and New York City fair for all. So brothers and sisters, thank you for this honor. Thank you for letting me come by and just saying hello. Yes. And I assure you, whether you live in Brooklyn or not, that I intend to serve each and every one of you with honor and distinction. God bless you all.